All right. Hello, world. Going to give it a quick minute to get all of my social channels synchronized. Eric Cook here with WSI and thelinkedbanker.com. Going to go live and chat a little bit about web accessibility, why it's important to not only your bank, but to your customers. And I've got 5 reasons specifically why we feel that this is important. Now, this is a little bit of an encore presentation that I delivered for WSI Corporate, and we syndicated this through the WSI Digital Agency Network, literally around the world, if I'm not mistaken. But we're going to do this separately, going to talk a little bit more specifically about banks and share why, from a web perspective, web accessibility is super important. So let's go ahead and we'll jump right into it and get started. If you do have comments or questions, feel free to go ahead and post them up into chat. Let me know. Would love to hear what you think. And if you are catching this on a replay, feel free to reach out if you'd like to have some dialogue and discussion afterwards. So for those of you that may not be familiar, maybe you're catching this on whatever social platform you're on and it grabbed your attention. If you're not familiar with WSI, this is the agency network that I actually joined back in 2007 when I decided to step away from the world of banking after 15 years as a community banker. So WSI as an organization has been around for over 25 years. And we are the world's largest digital agency network with offices in about 80 countries around the globe. And our office, based here in Michigan, specifically focuses our attention on the community banking and financial services sector. But we have agency partners and colleagues that do work in all different types of industries all over the world. So for customers that are working with our WSI agency for our banks, I think it creates a really cool win-win, because not only do we get to provide 15 plus years of banking experience, but if there's something that we need to get outside of the box on, we've got this global agency platform of WSI that we can collaborate and coordinate with. And we do that on a pretty regular basis. So it really creates a best of both worlds, and one that I'm really excited about. And now in our 14th year, going into year 15, certainly been a pretty awesome ride for us. So if we've not had a chance to meet, just brief little bio here. I mentioned earlier, I was a banker for 15 years here in Michigan. I made the decision that I did not want to be the CEO of a publicly traded bank, despite the fact that I had a father that did that for many, many years as a banker for 33 years. But I decided I saw some opportunities in the world of banking and digital. I started building websites, built the bank's first website is marshallsavings.com back in 1995. Wouldn't advise building a website in today's day and age without some sort of a plan, a budget, a risk assessment, or making sure that others in the organization know what's going on. But I went ahead and started building websites in 95 and really have never looked back. So the linkedbanker.com is our latest initiative to specifically help bankers understand the opportunities to build their personal brand. I did a live stream last week celebrating our 1-year anniversary of the Linked Banker. But our agency here in Michigan really is focused on all things related to digital strategy for banks, web development, social media, digital advertising, marketing automation, you name it. If it touches the web, we can do it. So that's enough about me and our business. Let's get to the meat of today's presentation. We're going to talk about these 5 things and go through a little bit of a background. Now, most of you likely have heard of web accessibility, probably have some sort of process in place. If not, it's something that you really should. So we're going to talk briefly about what web accessibility is. We're going to talk about why it's important, not just from a reputational litigation perspective, but why it's important to serve your customers and your community. The elements that impact web accessibility and the evolution that it's gone through, 2.0, 2.1, 2.2 coming down the pike. The benefits of having a website that is accessible and some recommendations and next steps. And at the end, you're actually going to get a little information. We've created a little punch list, kind of a guide that you can download and get access to. And we're going to share with you a couple of ways that you can get access to that information as well. So this is the definition from the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the governing entity that controls WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So basically, it's referring to any of the website tools, technologies that are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them across the web. So definition pretty much makes sense, but there's really 6 categories that we need to be thinking about. And these are areas when I talk to banks about web accessibility and we think about what accessibility means, oftentimes we think of, well, can blind people use my website? And that's maybe one of the largest segments of all of those, but it's not just completely blind people, it's the whole visual component. And I've actually got that as the last one here because I'll mention that. But with the web becoming much more of a rich medium, you've got all these other areas. So you've got your auditory, so if you have video content on your website or you're posting video content to channels like YouTube, which goes beyond your website, but it's still part of your web property, you want to make sure you've got things like closed captioning or you're doing text overlays so that if somebody either can't hear or they've just got sound turned off, and they don't want to have that interrupting them because they might be in an area that's either noisy or it needs to stay quiet, but for whatever reason they can't hear it. Auditory compliance as it relates to web accessibility is important. You've got physical or ambulatory. So if you've got individuals that are required to use very precise mouse dexterity or whatnot, and they've got some sort of an ambulatory issue, physical disability, maybe they're quadriplegic, they're using a mouth stick or a pointer, or they just have Parkinson's and they shake, or they have tremors. Physical disabilities are one that you need to think about. Cognitive would be individuals that might have some sort of a learning disability. Most of the time, dyslexia is probably the one that's seen most. And I'm going to share with you a tool that we use here at WSI and we use with a lot of our clients that actually has the ability to implement an open dyslexic font as a font style across your website, which is designed to provide assistance with those cognitively disabled individuals. You've got speech, where if you require somebody to actually talk into a device or a computer, speech disabilities, people obviously, if they don't have their capacity to speech or to speak, that could be an issue. You've got neurological, where it could be maybe sensitivity to light or flashing elements that would cause a tremor or a seizure, something along those lines. We have to be aware of those. And then, of course, the visual, not just from a completely blind perspective, and how does that content on your website actually get translated into Braille or assistive technology or read back, but do you have people that might be red-green colorblind, or they have glaucoma, or they need to be able to increase the size of the font because they've just got low visibility and they need to use, I don't know, maybe reading glasses like what I've got on. It's amazing how the older you get, the more fuzzy the text becomes. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but that's happening to me in my old age. But you've got your visually impaired individuals. So all of these are areas that you need to be thinking about as it relates to the disabilities associated with accessibility. So some additional non-disabled benefits that we need to start thinking about, and I'm just going to go ahead and reveal these, but we're now dealing with much smaller screens. We're dealing with smaller input devices. So you think of the smartwatches, the Apple Watches, those are elements that, while they may not necessarily be specifically mentioned, those are elements that could present challenges for individuals with a disability. You've got older people. I already alluded to myself, although I still think I'm in my 20s, but that's not the case. But changing abilities due to aging, a lot of those. Now, they may not be classified as a disability, but it presents a functional challenge, so we need to be aware of that. Temporary disabilities, somebody breaks their arm, they've lost their glasses and they cannot see very well, but it's not a permanent issue. They're going to be back. But if you don't have access to your limbs or visual capabilities, that providing any sort of an inconvenience Situational limitations present when, I talked about you're in a noisy area, you're in an area with a lot of sunlight that presents some challenges. And then, of course, if you have clients, customers that are living in more of a rural area, and we hear this oftentimes when doing web development for our banks, if they have a large rural population that doesn't have real high-speed internet, we need to be aware of that. So if there's elements that we have that we're planning on building into the website, do we need to provide some sort of an alternative means of delivering that content, because maybe they can't watch full motion video, they can't get easily over to YouTube, they can't watch embedded content or audio. We need to figure out, is that something that is potentially going to be an issue? Oftentimes when we're doing development or when you're testing from a business that might have high-speed connectivity. You've got a fiber connection or a high-speed data line. Not everybody has that. So we just need to be aware of those potential limitations. Some reasons why accessibility is important. There's some statistics here. I'm not going to read all of these off to you, but you can take a look at the world's population. You can take a look at people that are living with disabilities. You can take a look at people that disabled say that they never go online because of the challenges. They just want to avoid it. I did a webinar several years ago and was actually joined by an individual from the Department of Justice in their web accessibility division. And I also had an advocate who was a blind gentleman that joined the webinar. And so the three of us talked about web accessibility. And at that time, he actually made the statement that he is banking with the bank located in the Netherlands because none of the financial institutions that he could find in the United States had an online banking service that provided him the ability to confidently use online banking. He said, I didn't know if I was transferring $1,000 or $10,000 or $100. They wouldn't work with his assistive technology. And so he didn't stay off of the internet. His wife, who was not disabled, did most of the family banking, but for his accounts, he actually had to go and step outside of the United States and use an international bank because that's the only institution that he could find that had enabled accessible banking experience. So certainly a lot of reasons why accessibility is important here for us to take a look at. Some more statistics talking about the number of people that are going to age up. And so fonts, colors, mouse dexterity, other sorts of technology, making sure that we're paying attention to that. But yeah, just lots of stats here. And if you want to go back and relive any of those, or if you're interested in a copy of today's presentation, and you'd like to have a PDF version of the slide deck, just go ahead and hit me up and you'll have access to my email at the end. But you're watching this on some sort of a social channel because I'm pushing this out live. So that likely means that we are connected on social media. So you can always reach out to me in the comments of wherever you found this and tag me, and I'll find it that way as well. Lawsuits. We started seeing this probably 4 or 5 years ago, which is really what brought the whole issue to my attention. When I was at the bank, we received some demand letters from attorneys representing blind individuals claiming disability discrimination because we did not have Braille keyboard capability on our ATMs. And at the time, the only ATM that we owned and operated was a drive-up ATM. And it seemed really weird that we should have to put Braille keys on an ATM that can only be accessed through a drive-up. And the argument was a blind individual could be sitting in the back seat. A blind individual could be taken to that ATM and walk up to it. And so we ended up having to do some modifications. Now, we didn't have to pay any sort of legal fees. We weren't sued. There was no judgment. But the ATM providers started providing update kits and being able to provide Braille stickers that gave a tactile representation of the keys. And most of the ATMs that are out there today have got audio jacks and other sorts of ways that you can use those from an accessibility perspective. But when we got our first demand letter for a website, I was very concerned and somewhat suspicious that this was something that was not legitimate, that it was a phishing scam. It was something that we were not able to comply for or comply by. And I thought it was a scam. So I submitted this to some friends of mine within the government, and they looked at it, and sure enough, it was legitimate. Now, We've not had to pay any sort of restitution. We've been able to address these issues and to take care of them with some of our technology and some programming and some code. But it doesn't mean that people are still not going out and threatening lawsuits and sending demand letters and claiming disability discrimination for people that are disabled. So it's something that you need to be paying attention to. I'm going to just do a quick check on the, let's see here. Yes, going to send some slides. Absolutely. I got a little comment there on LinkedIn. So Amy, I will go ahead and make sure that you get the slides. Thank you very much for posting your little comment there. So lawsuits are still continuing to go up. They're still on the rise, and they're not showing any signs of slowing down. We are living in a litigious society, and people will sue anybody for anything these days. So we just want to make sure we take a look at that. But we also don't necessarily want to do this just to avoid a lawsuit, because at the end of the day, making your website, your web property, your digital properties accessible, I feel, is just the right thing to do. And even though you may have been sued and you were able to successfully refute that, 20% of lawsuits last year actually were to the same company coming back for a second time. So it's not a huge portion, but just because you may have been there, done that, and gone down that road, you want to make sure that you don't assume that they're not going to come back. So some other elements that actually impact your web's accessibility. We've got 7 boxes here. So obviously your content, the information that's on your website, that has an impact. You've got your user agents, which are how people actually consume the content. So the web browsers, the media devices, the smaller devices, the phones, the watches, if you've got browser capability. Probably going to date myself here, but I remember back in middle school when you could get a watch with a calculator on it, which you were not allowed to take into algebra class, by the way. But you had a watch with a calculator on it, and that presented a much smaller form factor to do some calculations. But now we've got watches that can browse the internet and consume content. So if you're producing information, does it react to the size of that screen and allow somebody to be able to read your information or engage or contact us or contact the bank? You've got assistive technology, which are the ways that people with disabilities will typically use the internet. So screen readers, braille keyboards, translators, auditory devices. Does your web content allow for those third-party services to consume your content and then reproduce it for somebody that is using them? We've got the user, which we need to think about because they may not be familiar with how to do it or where to go. So whatever sort of service we're using or however we're addressing accessibility, we just need to be very clear that that it's easy for them to turn this or turn these elements on or activate these elements if needed. From a development perspective, and that's us or your web company, if you're working with someone or if you've got that functionality being done internally within your organization. We've seen some of the larger institutions that have their own web team, making sure that they're familiar with the base elements of what constitutes an accessible website experience, as well as some of the third-party platforms that are out there. And you'll hear about one of the ones that we use quite often here at the end of today's discussion. Your authoring tools. So, at the web level, you've got content management systems and other sorts of platforms, your blogs, but you need to think about beyond those, what are the other platforms that are being used? We've got a little footnote here, but I'll mention it as well. You've got control of your website. And so a lot of these things, you can either work with your web developer or you can take care of some of those internally, but you've also got authoring tools and other technology that likely is being provided for you, your bank and your customers. And those are maybe outside of your control, your core providers, your online application systems, your third-party platforms, wealth management, credit cards. All of those are ones that you also need to be aware of. And then Lastly, we've got your evaluation tools. So ways that you can test the accessibility, ensure that things are working the way that they are, testing on an ongoing basis, because as we know, the web changes. So not only does that mean you likely, hopefully, if you're doing your job right, you're producing fresh, new, relevant content to your website through something like a blog or an article engine that's giving you the ability to add fresh, relevant content, which will have an SEO benefit. But anytime you add new content to your website, that new content also has the opportunity and the possibility of being non-compliant, because did you put the appropriate elements where they needed to go? And so having some sort of an ongoing strategy to evaluate, test, and remediate for accessibility is also very important. So the 5 benefits that we have here is basically you've got your legal risk. One of the reasons why we think that having an accessible site is you're spending more time looking at the code, you're planning out and determining exactly what information needs to be easily accessible to individuals with accessibility issues, which also means that the search engines are going to have better access to that. You're going to educate not just your visitors, but you're going to educate sites like Google to know what's going on. By doing all of that and by paying attention to the user experience and how people interact and consume the content on your website, it's just going to make your overall user experience that much better. So at the end of the day, everyone's going to benefit from it. It's going to position your brand as one that values this inclusivity. Now, we've also seen some of the banks that we've worked with that have been a little cautious on promoting that, because while their website has been brought into compliance and their website is now providing a much more accessible experience, they know that their core provider, their online banking system, may not have taken the same stance. And so from a transactional perspective, it's important to think about how your overall customer experience is going and making sure that you're having those discussions with your vendors so that you can get to the point where you can say that we value inclusivity across the board, not just from the marketing or the promotional or the educational content that's on our website. And by doing that, that has the ability for you to reach a greater audience, because in one of the statistical slides that I shared previously, it talked about the number of people that just don't bother going online because they're just disenchanted and discouraged by the lack of accessibility and the inability for them to get content when they go online. So your consumer audience might actually get bigger because you now are producing content. So this is that bonus tip that I was telling you about. In your third-party providers, it's very important that you think about those. And when I was on the webinar with the Department of Justice, they made it very clear that under the DOJ and under web accessibility guidelines, an organization is not able to contract away their responsibility as it relates to accessibility. So what that means is you can't just say, oh, well, that's XYZ. I'm not going to mention any core providers because I don't want to make it sound like I'm picking on anybody, but that's our core provider. They're the ones that do our online banking. They're the ones, so you can't sue us as a bank. That's their responsibility. At the end of the day, if they're providing services for you as a financial institution or as a business, maybe you're not a bank, but you're interested in web accessibility, so you're sitting in this webinar. If you have a small business and you're selling stuff online and you have an e-commerce engine and you are providing the ability for that to have a catalog with categories and product information and credit card checkout, if that's not an accessible experience and somebody with a disability wants to buy something from you, that could be a potential risk. When we were talking with banks early on in this, one of the things that we mentioned to our institutions was not only making sure that you make sure that your website is accessible, but as a credit risk. And bankers are familiar with risk because we manage it every day. I did it as a banker for 15 years. But when you think of extending credit to one of your businesses in the form of loan funds, one of the things that you might want to start asking your customers is, oh, and by the way, what portion of your revenue are you generating as a result of people coming to your website? What portion of your revenue that you are bringing into the business to generate income that will be used to repay this loan that I'm going to give you? What portion of that is coming through an online channel? And over the last 18 months, COVID, for businesses that had to shift and adapt, have had to embrace much more of an e-commerce strategy, because the electronic delivery of information, products, services, transactions really had to be embraced, because people could not come in to the actual business to conduct business and give you their card or make their payment in cash. And so if you have a business that generates a lot of the revenue online, one of the questions you might want to ask them as a follow-up and say, have you looked at the accessibility experience? Because what happens in one of the banks that we talked to, they had an auto parts dealer that was generating $3 or $4 million a year in revenue, and about 70% of that revenue was through their online store. People would go online, they would search for the auto part that they wanted. That e-commerce platform was at least 10 years old, was not mobile responsive, but they didn't really see that that was that big of a deal, because they still felt that it was worthwhile, and most of their customers just went to the desktop and purchased products there anyway. But we knew, because we took a quick look at it on behalf of the institution, that that e-commerce platform was not web accessible. So all it would take is for one individual that goes to that business that wants to buy something for their car and not have an accessible experience. And now you've got an opportunity for a lawsuit. You've got an opportunity for a disruption in the business. You've got a significant expense on the business to replace that e-commerce platform and to deploy that, which would delay their ability. You can just kind of see how the layers of the onion just get unraveled here. And it's one that you want to have that discussion beforehand versus after the fact. So one of the tools that we're using, and this is a platform that I discovered when I started looking around, and granted, you can always go back into the HTML code and you can start from scratch, and in a perfect world, building everything from the ground up entirely accessible is ideally the best solution. But given the fact that most people don't have the time or the budget to break everything down and get every single item, we've started seeing the arrival of technologies out there that will give you the ability through JavaScript overlays, and there's a lot of different kinds out there, so you need to be careful. But AudioEye is the partner that we actually started using just within our organization to help with our banks. And then since have introduced AudioEye to the WSI corporate structure, and now they're actually a global partner of ours within the WSI ecosystem. So it's been a really fun journey to go along with those folks, and have watched the evolution of their technology to help our customers meet accessibility requirements. But when you visit a website that has an accessible solution like AudioEye or some of the others, you'll likely see some sort of an indication in the bottom corner of the site with an accessibility element that will allow for you to manipulate and to analyze or change some of the accessible elements. So you can see here, I've enabled the accessibility tool, and this is giving me the ability where now, without having to go back in and modify the actual HTML on the site, the overlay technology that's been developed allows for me as a visitor to change the color and the contrast, and I can increase or decrease the size of the font. I can add that open dyslexic font, and any place that there's font being used on the website, I now have the ability to read it better because it's being produced in a font that's been scientifically proven to be easier for somebody with a disability like dyslexia to be able to read and comprehend. So all of these are elements that can be added. And the nice part about JavaScript type technology like this, if you're using a vendor that is reputable and doing their job the right way, it can be appended to a site without having an expensive tear down rebuild process. And as new content and information is being deployed on the website, new articles, new blogs, this information is actually being proactively monitored and updated. So it's a good continuation and an ongoing service to make sure that you that you're getting attention to your accessibility issues on a go-forward basis. So you'll get some sort of a certification or some sort of a reporting component that will give you some validation as to what is being done and what your score is. So you'll be able to see some before and after. So this type of technology is one that's certainly beneficial. we've got a partnership with Audio Eye. We've got some special advantages as it relates to pricing. So if there is an interest, you're certainly welcome to go directly to Audio Eye. And if you choose to do that, just tell them I said hi when you show up. But if you would be interested in Audio Eye and you're interested in seeing what WSI can do in order to save you a little bit of money, let me know, and we would be more than happy to chat. So the other document that we've produced, and I actually serve on WSI's accessibility committee, so we've been talking about accessibility for quite some time within WSI. We actually put together a checklist of things that are recommended for you to do as to how to prepare for this, or if you've got an accessibility program in place, it's a good double check to make sure that you've got the right elements in here. So at a high level, the 5 items that we suggest, first and foremost, document your research on the topic. So if you're watching today's webinar, somewhere you want to have maybe a record of that, or bring the hyperlink to this recording so that you can put that into your due diligence, so that, heaven forbid, you do get drug into some sort of a litigation or a demand letter situation, and you need to go before the courts to provide evidence that you were looking into this, that it is something that is on your radar screen, that you are doing something to mitigate and to take care of this. You want to document your research, your conversations, any of the discussions that you have around it. You certainly want to make sure that you get your website tested and understand where your potential exposure exists, and then develop some sort of a plan to determine how you're going to go about doing that. Now, you can enlist the help of a digital marketing professional such as us, or if you're working with a web agency, go back to them and ask them to do some of this for you. But then you want to develop some sort of a plan to be able to deploy a strategy. You're not going to eat the elephant all in one big gulp. So it's going to take some time. If this is an area that you've not been able to spend some time on, or maybe it's new and you didn't realize it was an issue, you're going to need to put together a plan and where you're going to be at the end of quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, at the end of the year, at the end of the next year, and then make sure that there's some progress being made on a regular, periodic, but consistent basis. And then that periodic review is important. Make sure that you're going back to this on a regular basis. If you don't really do a lot of updating to your website, if you've not gotten the content bug and you're producing information and you're building relevancy and doing the things that a good website owner should be doing as far as building out content and making your website more valuable, because then that provides you more information to share through social media, then you probably don't have to go back to your website and evaluate it and review it that often, because it's not changing that much. But if you're active, if you're sharing information, if you're dropping in new promotions and advertisements and awareness and other sorts of educational material, then you want to make sure that your review cycle is at least consistent with how often and how frequent you're actually sharing your information. So if you are interested in getting access to that document, you can certainly just drop me an email, share a post, or you can also visit our blog over at Powered by WSI. And if you go to our blog, there is actually a drop down where you can just click on and accept web accessibility, and that'll take you to a post where you can read a little bit more information about web accessibility, but then that also gives you the opportunity to fill out a form and get the downloadable PDF document that way as well. So I'm going to pause for some Q&A to see if there are any questions. I'm going to take a look here and see. I do have a difficult time pulling in Facebook Q&As. Looks like most of the questions that actually show up through my streaming platform are coming from LinkedIn. So if you are watching this stream on LinkedIn and you would like to ask a question, go ahead and type it in as Amy did there. Or I can go ahead and just jump to the last slide. There we go. Kyle asked a question. Is there a tool out there to make a PDF ADA compliant? Yes, there is. And if you had not asked me that question, I would be able to remember exactly what the name of the platform is, but I will flag that as a follow-up. I know that's one of the partner companies that AudioEye uses and a couple of other companies that I've talked to. But I will find that information out and I will make sure that I get that over to you and post it back as a note. So thank you very much. PDFs are certainly important. And I guess as it relates to PDFs, one of the things that we typically recommend is if the content can be pulled out of a PDF and put in the HTML, That's ultimately the best solution. One, you don't have to worry about accessibility for a PDF because that sometimes can be a little tricky. If it's just words on a page, usually that's a pretty easy thing to do. But when you start getting into PDFs that have got graphical elements, there's not readable text, you've got imagery that's really the font and not font itself, those PDFs sometimes can be difficult. So one prime example that we often will convert for our clients is the typical privacy statement that all banks use. It's the same format. It's the grid column. And Kyle, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's that PDF document that talks about your privacy statement, what you do and what you don't share, what you have control, what you don't have control over. And it's typically 2 pages. We've actually created an HTML version of that, and we just put that privacy policy directly on the website. And then if there is a change that ever gets made, the bank can still produce the PDF. They can still print that off and mail it to their customers as part of their annual privacy policy disclosure process. But on the website, it's just HTML content. The other reason that you want to pull that information out of a PDF and put it in HTML is it creates a mobile responsive view of that content. If somebody had to download a PDF on a mobile device, it's going to be really hard to see that, especially if the content in that PDF is in 3 columns and there's imagery and it's stacked. If we can take that and replicate it or pull the information out and put it in HTML, regardless of if somebody's on a big desktop or a mobile phone or a tablet like an iPad, it's going to be easy for them to consume that information. And the third reason is if it's content that you feel is really valuable to consumers and you'd like the Google search engines and the Googles of the world to find that, putting it in HTML and putting it on a web page is the best way to do that, because you can then optimize it. You can provide hyperlinks. You can internally link it back and forth to other pages. And when we've done projects for some banks, we've taken their product information that basically was a downloadable PDF of their consumer brochure, which is where all of their information is for their checking accounts and their savings accounts. That information was largely invisible to Google, certainly wasn't visible to any sort of on-site search functionality. And so pulling that information out and putting it in the HTML, most of the time when that strategy was done, it's likely because a bank was not using a content management system that allowed for easy changing and updating of content. So what the bank was forced to do is to put that information into a PDF, which they could produce, create that in InDesign or even Microsoft Publisher if they had access to that. But you can create that as a PDF, and then you just upload that PDF to the website, and that allowed for you to at least make sure that your product information got updated. And with the advent of CMSs and the ability to easily make changes right within the HTML without having to be a programmer or a coder, the necessity for putting your product information in a PDF has really gone by the wayside. So you want to get outside of that. So cool. Give it another couple minutes to see if there are any other questions. If not, I'm just going to wrap things up. I'm going to share with you another opportunity I mentioned at the beginning, although I don't know if I said it, but in my bio, it talked about our book, Digital Minds, and it's now in its 3rd edition, Strategic Approach to Connecting and Engaging with Your Customers Online. I've had the privilege of actually being a contributing author to all 3 editions of our Digital Minds series. And so that's been a great opportunity to collaborate with other consultants within the WSI network. I think the book's been translated into 4 or 5 languages, which is pretty cool. I know my mom likes to know that her son is a published author in France. Just sounds kind of cool. Although the 2 years of French that I had in high school, I get through about the first 1 or 2 sentences and then I'm lost. But if you're interested in getting access to our book, Digital Minds, you can download it as a Kindle version. There's that bit.ly link there that you can get access to. I think it's less than $5. It's not that expensive. If you don't want to spend the $5, go to our blog, do the search, find up the WSI, and we've got all 12 chapters out there as downloadable PDFs that you can get access to. So they are available for you to pull down, and you can go ahead and get access to them as well. On the blog, you also have direct access to get to that guide that we also talked about of the top 5 things to plan for your accessibility strategy. So With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's live stream. I appreciate those of you that were here, even if you didn't post a question or a comment. It's just nice to know that I wasn't here by myself talking to a webcam. And if you catch this on replay and you are interested in chatting about your bank's website, about accessibility, or pretty much anything else that relates to the world of digital and banking, and you like talking because this is a pretty passionate subject of mine, don't hesitate to let me know. I would love to sit down and chat with you. And if you, lastly, are a banker and you are interested in building your personal brand and connecting and collaborating with lots of other bankers from around the country to figure out how you can better use digital and social tools, I'm gonna, and Kyle has given me some thumbs up and some, I don't know what this is exactly called, but this is my heavy metal symbol. I use that emoji quite a bit. I would love for you to hop over to thelinkedbanker.com, check us out, and learn a little bit more about that mentoring and mastermind community that we've created. Basically, everything that I do online and digital is all about trying to figure out how we can help banks be better and bankers be better at their digital strategy and their digital efforts. So look me up, follow me, connect with me, chat with me. I'll look forward to seeing you online, but thanks for joining my live stream. Thanks for being here. And thanks for your interest in understanding and taking web accessibility seriously. It's the right thing to do. And you're one step closer to making sure that this is being done in your institution. So with that, we're going to go ahead and say it's a wrap. We'll see you online. Bye for now, everybody. See ya.